with our community. So thank you all.
Okay, so are we ready? We
think
should
so.
go ahead and start. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and broadcast. Let me go back to the slide. And after that, I'm gonna stop my video.
Can someone put the agenda in the chat?
Let me know. Let me do that now.
Are we ready? Okay.
Tell me when.
On behalf of the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education, I would like to welcome you to AAHHE Latina OX Heritage and Indigenous Peoples Days panel, Justicia and Reconciliation, Enhancing Racial Solidarity in Higher Education. My name is Lucia Gutierrez. I am AAHHE's Executive Director, and I will be assisting you as needed during this session. I will provide some general housekeeping information. Please spend a moment to ensure that you have a clean connection. I recommend that you turn off any Wi-Fi connections on your phone or iPad to ensure a wider bandwidth. After the presentation by our esteemed presenters, we will enter a period of participation Q&As. We ask that you please submit your questions through the chat box. Feel free to engage with both the presenters and attendees by using the chat function throughout the webinar. This is a live webinar and it is being recorded. It will be available for further viewing on our website. All participants are muted. Thank you very much to each of you for attending. Now I will turn the session over to AAHHE Chair-elect, Dr. Patrick Valdez.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Lucia, for the welcome and the introduction. On behalf of the AAHHE Board of Directors and the membership at large, I'd like to welcome everybody to this presentation, this panel, this discussion of a very timely topic. Before we get too deep, though, I do want to turn it over to one of our presenters today, one of our panelists, Sweeney Winchief, so that he can do a land acknowledgement.
Pinamaya Patrick. Hakunabi Hinknami Dagiabi. Chajimito Tanga Togahe Hinkna Sweeney Winchief Jr. Washijubi Magya. Omawashi Ekta Montana State University. Hinkna Mie Wayawatino Ekta University of Utah. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about how I'm thinking about a land acknowledgement as well as doing one. I've been it's been brought to my attention by one of my students actually that when we do land acknowledgements, we have to do them from a personal space so that they don't become cliche. There's a lot of critique around land acknowledgements and they've become a little bit controversial because in some cases they're becoming lockstep and just recorded statements or canned statements and lose some of their authenticity or genuine feeling. So first thing I want to recognize is, yes, of course, we're all on Indigenous land wherever we're chiming in from. And part of that land acknowledgement would be a call to action for you to think about how, if you're going to recognize the people, don't just recognize, but think about how we can be in community with one another and in support of one another, which I think is a really big part of today's conversation. So most recently, my land acknowledgement starts with the fact that I'm at a land grant institution. 1862, just the Moral Act as a part of a larger manifest destiny process served to provide opportunities at institutions like the one that I work at, served to create these institutions. And but it was as a result of the removal and displacement of Indigenous people. So back then, land grant institutions were essentially all about infrastructure development. So we have engineering, it was all about land and resource extraction. So it was agriculture, that's why we have a lot of land grants known as the Aggies. It was about military training like Texas A&M. So I'm thinking about these institutions that we work at, and they're asking us sometimes to do these land acknowledgements. I'm like, well, if we're going to think about land acknowledgements and you've reimagined your mission since 1862 to include the humanities, to include services and academic programs for students of color, maybe we can reimagine our maybe we can reimagine our relationships with Indigenous peoples. So I will let that serve as my land acknowledgement and also a call to action. For our participants here, I would like to recognize tribal sovereignty, Indigenous sovereignty, and the problematics of identity politics in who is and who is not Indigenous. I think that's going to be a really great part of today's conversation. But I also challenge others to think about how we can support one another in that sovereignty. Thank you for the opportunity to share, and I'll turn it over.
Thank you so much, Sweeney. Just a couple of some housekeeping guidelines for today's webinar. Share your thoughts via social media. We'd love for you to, if you're joining us, to share at AAHHE.org. Use the chat to ask questions. The moderator will follow up with panelists. And then please complete the feedback survey and recommend future webinar topics. I also want to remind you that we will be having our annual conference in Las Vegas in 2022 in March, and would invite all of you to join us. And in fact, today's webinar is a little bit of a sneak peek of a larger plenary that we will have on this very same topic. So we're hoping that you get excited by what you hear today and are encouraged to join us live in Las Vegas, and encourage others to join us as well. And now I'd like to do is turn it over to our moderator, Cristobal Rodriguez. He's not only an alum of the same university that I'm from, but also a good friend that I've known for some time. And we were talking here for a minute, all of us, before we turned on, that when we saw Angela here, we were all just, always starstruck when we see Angela, because despite her being such a great mentor and colleague to all of us, she has been so powerful in moving our community forward, all the communities of color. Now, that's not to say that all of our presenters today don't have in some way, shape, or form their own academic chops, but certainly what I was trying to say is that this beautiful community that we have, we sometimes forget the wealth of knowledge and power that we possess. And today's webinar is a way to remind us. And so throughout the year, we want to have more webinars where we are bringing in our experts, our people who have been working in these fields, in these areas, and continue to validate rather the work that they're doing, but also to acknowledge that work. And so we're all excited that we're together here today. There's a lot of love in this room, as we were talking about earlier, a lot of respect, a lot of praise. And so we want to be thankful and grateful, and we are thankful and grateful that you've joined us. And I am thankful and grateful that my good friend Cristobal is going to moderate. And thank you for all the work you did in helping put this panel together, Cristobal. And to all the panelists, muchísimas gracias. Thank you all. And I will now turn it over to Cristobal.
Gracias, Patrick. I always appreciate your love, and you make quite the MC and host in any event. And so I want to definitely recognize your inspiration and the work that you do. Before we get started, I want to take this moment to also introduce and thank and express the sense of deep gratitude and the blessing to be able to have this opportunity to engage our communities with these three amazing panelists. I'm going to start by briefly introducing the three, and then I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about their own kind of experiences in decolonizing education. Our first panelist today, Soribel Genao, my hermana. She's my Dominicana Haitiana hermana from the Brooklyn communities of the East Coast. And so I appreciate Soribel's time and inspiration. And also, more importantly, her and I have been kind of working together in this idea of how we build solidarity across our communities, how we enhance, and more specifically, racial solidarity and coalition building. To that extent, from her work being at part of the CUNY system in Queens College, she's currently the Queens College Provost Diversity Fellow, which allows us to really kind of continue to advocate for our racial solidarity efforts and leadership over on what it means to advance all of our communities. Most recently, however, I also want to highlight and show her noteworthy publication, Recasting Solidarity, a call for radical engagement and academic unification, in the International Journal for Qualitative Studies in Education. Our second panelist, Angela Valenzuela, who I had the blessing, as Patrick said, to have learned from her and engaged in her advocacy and leadership in so many powerful ways. And to be in the same kind of spirit of advocacy and leadership as Angela, and that shaping my whole kind of academic worldview, if you will, has been a truly powerful blessing. And so her work over at in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at UT Austin has been inspirational, not just to me, but to so many of us. I do want to really highlight the most recently, she is now part of the 2021 cohort of the National Academy of Education, which is kind of like, that's the medal kind of education scholar crew. So felicidades, Angela. I also want to highlight her efforts in co-founding the Academia Cuahuatli, a cultural revitalization program of instruction in Spanish for 4th and 5th graders from 5 East Austin ISD schools. And she will highlight a little bit more of that conversation a little bit later. So gracias, Angela, for your continuous inspiration. Then our third panelist is my academic brother, Sweeney Wingchief. Sweeney Wingchief and I go back some time now, and in fact, probably more than 10 years, 11 years or so. And being inspired by the same kind of decolonizing thoughts in our own kind of thinking. He's probably my reflective brother in so many ways when it comes to our own kind of advancement, our own work, our own communities. And it's nice to really have someone that I can continuously be grounded with and be inspired. And his work, when it comes specifically to reflecting how do we connect our work in the way of connecting the dots from the work to our communities, to our families, that's where him and I come from. And that's where his work really shines to a whole other level. He is a member of the Fort Peck tribes, Assiniboine in Montana. I hope I said that right, Sweeney. And his research interests include education, specifically under the umbrella of Indigenous intellectualism. His teaching privileges include critical race theory, Indigenous methodologies, and research law and policy in higher education and institutional research. And I love this, how he describes himself, because I completely agree with him. Him and his wife have 2 sons, and it helps to keep things in perspective. Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to start us off in the same order that I introduced our panelists. I'll have Soribel Genao tell us a little bit about herself, introduce herself, and a few minutes on decolonizing education.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. This is not just my pleasure, but truly an honor to sit here with 2 people that I not only admire, but also am very just grateful. And you know, they say that healthy anxiety is great, and right now this nervous joy is just everything. So thank you, everyone. But you know, I love the intersectionalities of our connections here, because for a long time, even as my role at Queens College has evolved from assistant professor, which, to be quite honest, it was not a field that was kind to me when I first came in. It wasn't a field where the enticement of what am I going to do beyond here was something that was set forth from the very beginning. But I was fortunate to find these amazing and stellar people outside of the university community. And by that, I mean folks that were actually stakeholders who didn't need the pedigrees or the credentials, but were very clear in their delivery and their messaging to me of, no, we need you to stay there because you're the voice that we are not able to have, right? And in my work, I recognized that a lot of the curriculum that I was prepared with didn't make sense, right? I went to a great institution, Rutgers University, but I kept asking, I'm like, why am I looking at the Weberian theory? This has nothing to do with me or my people. I have absolutely no desire to continue this. And you know, in looking into how even the notions of my family and how much traditions and values and kind of the upbringing that Black and Latino communities have, and I decided to continue excavating my own past, right? I am so grateful for my parents who have individually and respectively been very clear. It's great that you speak the English language, but that is not your mother tongue. And we're very insistent that I continue to be curious and that I continue to inquire, even when things are published, It doesn't mean you have to agree with it. And that really forced me to even go back home, right? To go to the island that we are now calling Dominican Republic in Haiti. And it was there that I found that, you know, my maternal grandmother, who was a force, her identity is Afro-Indigenous. She doesn't go by Latina. She never went by Hispanic. I looked at my mother's cédula recently and I was like, why does your cédula say Afro-Indigenous? Just because I'm not from here. The United States casted you with this Latina Hispanic terminology that we are not. And with that alone, it really forced me to understand that if I could only take what it was that my grandmother was thinking about early on, about curiosities and the love of understanding how we think and how we move and why we do the things we do. I wish I had that strength when I was in my graduate programs and understanding why my curiosity was what it was. And now fast forward, I truly urge my students and even my colleagues at times to push back, to stop accepting what's written for us and not by us, to be more inclusive in the way that we approach how we show up, and not show up in just, hey, I'm Dr. Soribel Genao, but no, I'm Dr. Soribel Genao. I dance merengue. I love my culture. I am gonna bring all of this here because without it, I wouldn't be who I am. And it is the person that I'm still authentically coming to terms with, that I am more than just this academic. I am so much more to my community than I knew. And I truly, truly hope that as we continue this conversation, that we continue to evolve in not just how we show up, but what it is that we leave behind. Thank you.
Trying to capture the moment, taking a little selfie of the group, and I got caught there for a moment. But gracias, Soribel. That resonated on multiple levels. You probably, if I don't know if anybody would see me, but I was smiling in certain moments. All of us were like nodding and agreeing. So thank you. Angela, por favor, please.
It's such a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you, Soribel. That was so beautiful what you shared, and the land acknowledgement is so important. We are always on native land. Happy Indigenous Day to everybody. We're as Latinx people, Mexicano. I think many of us are discovering, many for the first time, just how powerful our Indigenous identities are. That has led to us embarking on a journey, right? It's a journey of re-indigenization, of discovering our roots, of connecting to those roots, of making them meaningful, and re-examining our own commitments to Indigenous peoples in North America, in Central America, South America, on Turtle Island, right? For me personally, there's not any one time that all of a sudden I became Indigenous, but rather it's just been sort of a series of punctuated moments throughout my life. And of course, now it's part of my community work and my scholarly work. But I do feel that that the liberation comes in knowing that we're not strangers, right? We're not foreigners, regardless of where we're from, even if we're heavily policed and militarized and excluded and scapegoated. And I think now more than ever, we need to reacquaint ourselves with these identities that have such redeeming potential. We're not even racial groups. I mean, God, those are terms that emerge with Western colonization. They emerged with slavery and genocide of Native peoples. I mean, there's no white nation. There's no white, right? It's a social construction, right? And when I think about our communities, I mean, we've been here since before there was a United States, since before there was a Texas, right? We've been here, and our ancestors, you know, they navigated and roamed freely across the continent, and so yeah, I mean, I teach these things in my classes and my coursework, and then we have our escuelita, Academia Cuautli. It is not Nahuatl. Cuautli is Nahuatl for eagle. So the last emperor of Mexico was Cuauhtemoc. So that's the same root, Cuautli, eagle. And his name meant descending eagle. Cuautli means eagle. And we're inspired by the eagle because the eagle is a symbol of transformation. It's a symbol of resurrection and renewal. And if there's anything that we need in our schools and in our communities is renewal, right? Because what we have is a colonial model of education, both in K-12 and higher ed, a model that makes it acceptable that we graduate from high school or the university and not know anything about this continent. And that's like totally within the scope of what it means to be educated in our country. That's not acceptable, and it contributes to the reinscribing of the differences that we see in our community along the lines of race and class and gender. And I mean, this is a framework that many of us have taken to task. We've taken it to task through our activism. We've been involved, and when I say we, we're many people involved in locally, at the state level, nationally, in getting that precious knowledge into our K-12 curriculum, as well as into our higher education curricula, right? And that's why we're seeing all the reaction right now against it. Is to preempt us, or an attempt to preempt us from actually learning the truth of history, the truth that actually is what is good for all of us. It contributes to, or it enhances our intellect and well-being, and it prepares us for college. And so these movements that we see at play, I think we should take as a compliment. It means that we're being effective. It means that we're making a difference. We're also undeterred. I mean, it doesn't matter, frankly, that the right is attacking us. I don't know when they're going to learn that their attacks must only make us stronger. They just cease to learn that. And if anything, we can thank the right for the replenishment of our identities. And not only that that's the only our main source of replenishment, it's also, of course, our communities and the work that we do there, and frankly, the migrant stream that ever is a source and a fountain for creativity and beauty, for hard work and innovation. So I'm just very thankful to be part of this conversation. I think that to re-indigenize is to embark on that journey to the self. We live lives where we're told who we are, like you just said, Soribel. We're told all the time who we are, and we always think that who we are is somewhere out there that we have to get, right? That we have to discover and that we have to be. And so much of what is colonial is this idea that who we are is a result of what we do and the credentials that we have, and less about that journey to the self, and that's an indigenous epistemology. This idea of beingness, right? Of more about beingness than about doingness, and in that space of being is where we discover that who we are is beautiful, right? That who we are is sufficient. And so thank you so much for this opportunity.
Muchísimas gracias, Angela. Thank you for highlighting the transformational resistance when we're challenged in this kind of political discourse, that we, there's something to be said about the empowerment that our communities have, given all of that. So mil gracias. I'm going to turn things over to SUNY Winchief, Dr. Winchief.
Absolutely, thank you, Cristobal, and I really appreciate being on this panel. There's something to be learned every time we engage, and this time you just sort of up to the ante. And the first thing I would need to do is recognize all of you in your places of leadership, not just those of you on the panel and the folks leading this, but all of those of you watching this and sharing this time with us. I want to breathe life into your mana, or your intent, as you move forward from this space. And by doing so, I want to recognize that and your potential work. The second thing I need to do is recognize the relationality that we have here. I need to consider how we're related, and I need to be a good relative in that. It's very important for me is to introduce my connection to this space. I grew up in Montana and Wyoming. I was born at an Indian school in Utah, and didn't have a lot of connection with our Latinx relatives. And until I went to, I lived in New Mexico for a little while, and it changed my outlook. It was a really good example of how we're indoctrinated in the American education system to think about different people's identities. In this specific case, those that identify or identified by their communities as Chicana, Chicano, Latinx, etc. One of the things that I learned was this beautiful complexity, right? And this, my schools and my upbringing taught me to think in a binary, and that binary I think would be changed to just either Mexican or white. Like that was the binary. Moving to Albuquerque, New Mexico, creating relationships, developing familia in that space really opened my eyes to the indigenous part of the Latinx identity. And as a result, moved forward, ended up going into a doc program at the University of Utah. And my committee chair was Dr. Octavio Villalpando. And during that time, I had to rethink how we were going to navigate this higher educational space, right? What can we take from our own, to quote one of our colleagues, our own community cultural wealth to survive this space. And so I started thinking about it in terms of family and traditional fictive, or traditional kinship structures. So specifically for Assiniboine or Nakota people. And this is in the literature, so by indigenous people. So I'm not over disclosing community held knowledge. But I was told that if you think of your own family, your mom is your mom, but so are her sisters. Your dad is your dad, and so are his brothers. Now your mom's brother is those are your teasing uncles, right? They tease you, and they tease you when you're little, they tease you till you cry, and then they tease you for crying. And they also have the role of speaking or bragging for you, so you don't have to brag for yourself. Now, your dad's sisters are your aunties, and they are the disciplinarians, but they have discretion over how they can discipline, right? Back in the day, it was up to them. If they wanted to sit you down and talk and work through it, they could do that, or they could get rough with you, whatever they wanted. I thought about how we can use this to navigate higher educational space, and started developing this concept of academic family. So in talking about my academic lineage and connection with this particular space right here, I have relatives, I have academic cousins, Daniel Solorzano students at UCLA, wherever they end up, I see them as academic relatives, academic cousins. We got all these cousins all over the place, got academic brothers and sisters from my own program, and I see that as a place of solidarity and strength. But also in my obligation in that relationship is to remind them of that indigenous part of their identity. That is an important part, and one really good way of starting that conversation is challenging the Spanish language as the language of the conquistador. So with that, that was a part of something that is to me super important for me to state in this space, because it feels like an obligation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sweeney. I appreciate always your thoughtful inspirations. I want us to we're gonna have a few questions and see how quickly we can move through this, but I want us to think about more specifically in our roles as an idea of how we approach higher education. How do we essentially engage our communities in higher education that we all are connected to at some level, to the idea of then using indigenous epistemologies across all of our identities or all of our communities as an approach to the work we do? And anybody can jump in at this point from the panelists.
I'll start because this is something that's very recent for me in my delivery. And I say my delivery as, and in the introduction, I should have corrected you, but I was the inaugural diversity fellow. I pushed my, as Sweeney just said, my academic sister to step in this year, and Elisa Bejalva, another powerful Afro-Latina, is now taking the role. But I bring this up because a lot of the roles that are now being highlighted and emphasized around these trends of diversity, equity, inclusion have very little to do with what these actual words mean, and more to do with the injustices of our belonging, right? How much time has been paid to, the attention has been paid to how it is that we're actually fitting in and the roles that we take on. And in my positions, I have been fortunately pushed by the academic other mothers, right, to see a side of myself that I was not prepared to see. And it was always because there was a fight to fight. And in this role, I had to really stand up to a lot of the white men in academia who don't understand empathy, don't understand the communities that we work with, but are really quick to tell us about the policies that they have written to put in place for us. In fact, a lot of the work that I've been confronted with has been to kind of curtail or kind of comfort them in a way that I'm not trained to do. I'm not going to teach you how to treat me. In another instance, I've also had to really sit back and kind of rethink the way this whole world of the academy actually works, right? Because in essence, we're constantly pledging for the next role, right? You know, we come in as an assistant professor, then we become an associate professor, then we become full, and then therefore, and so on. And in those processes, I wonder all the time about how is it that I can get to these places where I can speak up for the populations after me, all the while still having one hand down to make sure that I pick up those Black, Brown, Indigenous people that are still behind. And I go back and I do a lot of the reflective work to think about what is it about the way that I was trained, or the way that they wanted to train me, or the conditioning that was put on me. What about that am I ready to break? And when I break it and push forward, how is it that I'm showing up? And in these roles, as I was a fellow, but I continue to be this lifelong learner, where I truly respect my students and their abilities and capacities in teaching me that a lot of what we are presenting to them, while it's theoretical, the way that we put it in practice has less to do with if this, then that, and more to do with, well, does it even fit right now? Why do we have to go with this theory? Why can't we create our own? And I can't help but think about, you know, we just observed Indigenous Peoples Day, and there's this meme flying around about a Dominican kind of, I would say he's an actor. He's from the Washington Heights or the Bronx area here in New York City. And I think about how he gets into somebody's car and the police comes and says, you stole a car. And he said, No, I didn't. I discovered it. The car was by itself and I discovered the car. So now the car is mine, right? And I can't help but think about how our people, my people in Haiti and Dominican Republic felt, right? When one of the leaders of white supremacy in the most European way, Columbus arrived and claimed my island, right? And to say that you're going to come in and kind of shake things around at institutions where if we're not there, then why? Why are you there? This institution, which we call academia, is made up of ideas, and the ideas that show up when we show up. And the fact is that when we are around, that in itself goes back to the community wealth and the wealth of not just ideologies, but the time and essence that has actually taken place because of our histories that truly show up in all we do.
Well, I guess I'll comment. There's just so many ways that epistemology is important. It's important in what we teach, in how we teach. It's important in our advocacy. It's important in our community work. We advocate for ethnic studies and for inclusion in the state curriculum. I mentioned earlier, Academia Cuautli, it's organized by a community-based organization that is called Nuestro Grupo. And we got organized back in 2013, and we envisioned what we might do to address literacy issues in East Austin that is historically segregated. Now it's being gentrified, a community that has been honestly continuously in attack. I don't see many breaks that we've had throughout pretty much the duration of our escuelita, founded in 2014 when we're in our 8th year. We co-construct curriculum. It's fully from an indigenous perspective, and we have danza mexica, Aztec dance, which is not really dance, but it's ceremony. And so the idea of bringing the sacred into education. In a third space, we're located at the Mexican American Cultural Center. So the idea is to really kind of, like rescue ourselves from the overprescribed space of schools. Not that schools can't be culturally relevant or inclusive, but they are reflective of their own iterations, such that opportunities like danza might not be available in those kinds of spaces. Whereas in the community, there's a number of things that number of opportunities that we can enjoy and that come organically from being involved in community. But it's also a liberatory space because it's not prescribed or overprescribed. There's freedom in the third space. And it brokers that relationship between the home, which is the space of the funds of knowledge, the vernacular, and the real freedom, right? The real learning that happens that comes from our ancestral epistemologies. We might think of them such as healing practices as from Mexico or Mexican or Latin American or Caribbean, but they're indigenous. And so a lot of it is just sort of rescuing from what we know from the more modern manifestations of identity, the ancestral and indigenous, including the Spanish language. I appreciate very much what Dr. Sweeney, when she said earlier that we have to decolonize and realize that we are the product of two major colonizations. And so we don't know our indigenous tongues, our indigenous languages. Some of us have our identities, but maybe are not part of a community. But it doesn't mean that we can't come together with an imaginary, right, with a community that can construct and reconstruct a sense of self that is built on that knowledge, culture, the cultural arts, the indigenous wisdom that is still here. It's in the ground. It's within ourselves, and we don't even know that or recognize it in a way that affirms those aspects of being that are fully indigenous. I mean, they're fully indigenous, right? When we think about our respect towards our elders, well, where does that come from? I mean, this idea that we have to respect our elders and an elder epistemology, the idea of intention, I think that is so core and central. And if we're going to be organizing in community, I mean, we have to have a good intention, right? Not unlike when you have ceremony. You know, I was really, you know, really impacted when I first learned about, I mean, all of the stations or cargos, all of the responsibilities are important in ceremony, but it really impacted me once when I first learned about and contemplated just how important, if you're the one responsible for the fire, well, you better be in good relation to yourself and in good relation to others, because you've got fire, you're carrying fire, and you could destroy yourself, you could destroy everyone if you're not in good relation with yourself. You have to be in harmonious relation with the elements and with yourself, with your community. Otherwise, you cannot have that cargo, you cannot have that role. You would put everybody at risk. So, I mean, things like that are just so life-giving and profound as we think about, you know, what we can do as a community that will, I think, really advance our cause. A practice that we've had since 2013. When we started meeting, you know, we decided we would start a Saturday Academy. We would develop curriculum, we would prepare teachers, we would focus on children who are coming into the 4th grade, but we also teach 5th graders. We offer instruction to children in 5 East Austin schools right now. You know, what we knew early on was that that if we were going to like be a place that was desired or desirable, well, we ourselves would have to be renewed. It would have to be desirable to us first, right? And so we have the practice of floricanto, and that comes from our ancestral wisdom, flower and song, the idea of you know, being part of a community by sharing of oneself, right? And so every time that we meet regularly on Wednesdays. We've met regularly on Wednesdays for 9 years now during the school year. And so we always begin with floricanto. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if all schooling began with flower or song, with some expression of caring? It could be something that inspired you in the week, something that touches you, a poem, a letter from a relative, something that you recall from your childhood that can be a blessing to others. It builds trust and deepens our connections to each other as we reflect on each other's sharing. And so much of our meetings are, I mean, they're half floricanto and then half business of getting things happening with the school, or it's addressing local political issues. There are always many. It's just all of the stuff of being in community, but being in a community with a positive intention in a way that is it's always about renewal, right? It's always about kind of being new and fresh and honest, you know, with each other, so that we can help lift everybody's load, right? I mean, we're volunteers, mostly volunteers. And we all have a load, all of us. We all have a burden, a cargo of some kind, right? And so the question always is, well, you know, how can we help each other in this process, particularly throughout these horrible campaigns, anti-immigrant campaigns? I mean, brutal. They've been brutal. Our own teachers have been traumatized. Our DACA teachers, who themselves had some of them, their parents taken away from them and deported, have been brutalized and traumatized by what we've experienced in our communities. And you know, so what's nice, what's really nice and beautiful is we are a community. I'm just one person. We are many. It includes Dr. Zamora, our elders like Marta Cotera, Bambi Cárdenas. It includes our graduate students, our undergraduate students, it includes our community-based institution and our school district. This is a partnership. And so we're creating this tertiary space, this third space that is, that is really powerful. I encourage people to consider that if you want to think about how we can get that precious knowledge, those precious epistemologies into our lives in a living, breathing way. To consider, what is happening in your local community arts institutions? How was the university involved? And then how can we bring that back and have it be a vital aspect of our advocacy, right? And how are ceremony and advocacy connected? I mean, I won't have a revolution if I can't dance, right? And so that revolution of the spirit is one that we've already, it's victorious. It's a victorious life. We don't have to wait for colonization to finally at some point be this utopic reality. Colonization is now, as we just decolonize our ways of knowing and being and become part of a community that is about joy and happiness and celebration. I mean, why aren't these discourses a regular part of what school is about? Why are they anathema? That should tell us a lot that they're not, right? But we need to just reintegrate ourselves into these ways of knowing that are sacred and life-giving.
Gracias, Angela. That was deep. You made me go into multiple reflections. So, Sweeney, you want to add to that?
Oh, I don't know if I can try. I can try. I think it's a really, is it possible for me to share my screen?
Let's see, Lucia.
Yes, you have rights to share on the bottom.
Okay, thank you. I just want to give an example. When we talk about Indigenous epistemologies and how they can work in these academic spaces. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see, play from current side, make it a little bit bigger. All right, so this is an example. This is one of my attempts at being able to do this. And I'm at a conference right now, a regional education conference in Idaho, a place where we can't teach critical race theory, but we certainly did. This is a winter count, right? This was myself and Dr. Jason Cummins submitted this as our academic poster and presented it just like 2 days ago. And I want to walk through this really fast. I know that we're pretty short on time. But this is moving, this is, the root of this was being challenged. Like, you talk all these big words in this theory, can you take what you have home with you? Can you present it to your aunties, your uncles, those family members that we talked about earlier? And so we really sat down and thought about this and thought about how it was important, to take things home for multiple reasons. So this is a winter count, and a really brief history of this is that the first snow, elders would get together and they would talk about the most important thing that happened in the previous year. And they would tell the person that kept this written record, this pictorial record, what that story was. Their job was to paint it on this hide, because this was before paper. It served as a history. So that person that painted it had to recognize and remember that story. So instead of Monday Night Football or the evening news, they would break out these winter counts and they would share stories about what happened these previous years and tell the stories about that. It was a community at once history keeping, but also entertainment, sort of around the fire sorts of things. So we use that old school methodology, or I guess old school communication style, to describe this idea of many ways of knowing. So up here, when we painted, we didn't paint anything, because this is exclusion and erasure of our people in curriculum, right? This is exclusion and erasure of our people in research. Now, a lot of people think that the opposite of exclusion is inclusion, but sometimes inclusion can be colonial and problematic. Problematic inclusion includes things like the mascot issue, racial microaggression, people referring to our work, our cultural representations in really problematic ways. So we move from exclusion and erasure to problematic inclusion to theoretical sensitivity, right? Things that we can read about. All of us here can Google Scholar something and become pretty sharp in about 24 hours if we really need to. We could put something smart down on paper and throw it and submit it if we're really pressured. But that's only what we've read, right? So my mom was a letter carrier, and there was these stamps that came out in the 90s. And she looked at my dad, who's a Assiniboine, and she said, "Look, you guys got your own stamp." She said, "They call it the headdress series." And then my mom, who's non-native, but spent a lot of time in our community, my dad's side of the family's community on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, says, "Shouldn't that actually be called the War Bonnet series? Because every time we're working with it at your family's place, they refer to them as war bonnets." My dad says, "Well, yeah." So that's where she moved, or actually she didn't move. She started with this thing that was theoretically sensitive, applied her own cultural intuition, right? I use the term community and cultural intuition and borrow it from Dr. Dolores Delgado Bernal. She talks about cultural intuition in her testimonial spaces. We recognize that in this scholarship as Indigenous knowledge, right? So this is our way of explaining. We know what these are, we know what they're called, there's ceremony around them, and that's not stuff you're going to read in a book. If you do read it in a book, it's problematic, right? So we go from this place of cultural intuition, and we think about cultural intuition as cultural intuition can still be critiqued, right? I think that the term war bonnet was demasculating men, right? In the pioneer days, when we had all these manifest destiny folks rolling over in trains and wagons and stuff, they referred to these hats that they wore as bonnets in the English language. Well, who wears bonnets, right? Babies and women. So there's also a critique in the use of the English language when it refers to cultural intuition. We need to be conscious that there is deep knowledge and Indigenous knowledge realization. That Indigenous knowledge realization is protected in the community. It's at most times, it's not for academic consumption. This is something that happens in community and in languages, and not only should it not be disclosed in publication or in sometimes public spaces, but it needs to be protected, held close, made it easy to avoid by outsiders for particular reasons, for reasons of misappropriation. Someone couldn't carry that responsibly, they might hurt someone, etc. So this is my attempt to build upon what our good colleague Angela shared, is can you take this home? Can it be creative? Can we celebrate it? So last night, or 2 nights ago when we were sharing this, I was just waiting for some person super grounded in the white or the Washiju academic paradigm, the predominantly white institutions, to critique this work. But what they don't know is this is a project of bicultural accountability. Each one of these concepts on here has a literature review behind it that was done in an academic way. So this is something that we can take home, but it's also something that we can bring into the academy, and we're trying to find that space. So thank you for the opportunity to share that. We're really excited about it. But I know that we're getting short on time, so I'll turn it over.
Thank you, sweetie. Yeah, we are getting short on time, but also, this is meant to also provide a teaser for our communities into the convening that's coming up in March out in Nevada State, which is right outside of Las Vegas. Brief question, and then at that point we'll probably have to wrap it up. One of the things as we go into these spaces and advocate for racial solidarity, I always tend to land back on the concepts of reconciliation within our own communities, within ourselves, and as well as for the way of dominant thinking as well. And that reconciliation is something that I don't see hardly any conversation, curriculum, or efforts. And it takes me back often to my own experiences, even in Germany, and having to go into deep concepts of reconciliation from their histories. So that's kind of the question in brief. Kind of your all's thoughts about what does reconciliation and racial solidarity look like in higher education? And I'm going to give each of you a minute to answer that. And anybody can jump in on that one. Sweeney, you want to start us off?
I was trying to be respectful, and at the same time glad I was trying to be respectful, so I didn't have to go first. But thank you, brother. I think that like in speaking in terms of epistemology and pedagogy, reconciliation, I think we need to balance the discourse, the historical discourse that we've been told about ourselves. The only time that they talk about us is in times of conflict, right? This group of indigenous people don't get along with that group of indigenous people. What they don't understand, these relationships are fluid and over time, right? The lines were not borders like they're drawn as states and nation states today. In fact, previously mentioned was the beauty of immigration, and to me, immigration is a natural part of this is indigenous people following traditional migrational patterns over millennia. Right? There's no wall, no policy that's going to stop that. I mean, from my perspective, you could try, but that's not going to work out very well. This has been happening a long time. So we need to think about and change. I'll wrap up real quick, challenging that discourse of conflict with a very real discourse of how we're alike, how we complement each other, and when in times past and in the future is there the opportunity to support one another as indigenous peoples, and not to buy into that colonial academic paradigm that we're only people at conflict with one another. So yeah, that's my minute. Thank you.
Soribel,
I'll follow, Sweeney. I think, Cristobal, with the work that you and I are currently doing and continue and persist on building, to what was just said, there are all of these conflicts that have been created, the narratives that have been pushed on us that are not necessarily accurate. I think back to, the colonizations of our own countries and our respective like homes, right? And how, as a Taino descendant myself, like the fact that I can speak multiple languages, right? And I can also be part of several worlds and not ever feel excluded. And yet I've had folks here in the United States tell me, well, you're not Black enough, you're not Latina enough. And I'm just like, but who are you to tell me that? And my transatlantic history is very different from yours. I mean, I was just fortunate to have been thrown into different languages, cultures, and here I am. And I know that if my ancestors were able to come together beyond conflict or revolutions or the uncivilizations, here it is. Why can't we? Why is it that we're only coming together in times of crises? Why is it that we're only coming together when something is not going right? When in fact, we are the only answers. We have the reflective power to look internally to then be able to exert and give that output that's necessary. As it comes to curriculum, it is our time. It is our time to deconstruct all of it. And I want to throw some curse words, but I won't, because it just gets so infuriating to see that all of these lies are still being perpetuated. And I'm loving that we can be a part of this new history where we can actually say, can you believe this was what was taught at one point, and have us be the ones to culturally enrich what they did not have any idea we can bring forth to this. So I would say that it starts with us and reclaiming our power and our time.
Gracias, Soribel. Angela, you want to close us out with some thoughts? You're on mute.
I just support everything that's been shared. I just love the idea of creating a new history, a new story. That's so beautiful, and it's consistent with this notion of revitalization that is about solidarity. I think what gets in the way a lot is assimilation. I think we need to really be mindful of that, and including the ways in which we've assimilated colonial epistemologies, right? And again, these epistemologies are so much about doing as opposed to being. And so I think we really need to focus more on our beingness. And so, since so much of what afflicts us is the colonial gaze, that posture, right? And many of us, especially in higher education, I would say, as we acquire our credentials and our mobility and we move up in these high spaces within the academy, unfortunately, not talking about anyone here necessarily on the call or in the room, but one sees that reinscribing of that same colonial gaze by our African American, Native American, and our Indigenous Latinx brothers and sisters. And it means that we've drunk the Kool-Aid, right? And we didn't make use of this opportunity, or we weren't perhaps exposed to it for being part of this new story that we want to craft. And so we need that lens that helps us to decipher, to decipher those moments. We absolutely need to bring leadership that is in good relation with self, with identity, and with others. Thank you so much for this awesome opportunity to commune with you. Yeah, thank you.
Gracias. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate, and there was a comment earlier about everybody's medicine here is strong, and I love you all for it. Thank you for your time and sharing your thoughts. I'm going to hand it over to Patrick to close us out. You all please stay healthy and strong, and we will look forward to seeing you in March, hopefully.
Awesome. Again, thank y'all so much. I know that we're a little past the hour, but I want to thank everybody, first of all, Cristobal, your work, and all the panelists for your time, your commitment, your power, your strength, your grace, everything. This has been chicken soup, el caldo, for the soul today, and it's really moved me. And I would just say that in terms of our systems, I'm reminded of it's not enough that we get people of color in positions of leadership and power. We have to change the systems when we get in those places, and the knowledge that we have to share that knowledge. So again, muchísimas gracias a todos. Please fill out the survey. Please join us in March in Vegas for our annual conference, so that we can get together and do some bailando, get some dancing done there, as Angela suggested. And I want to thank Monique Posadas, who's on the program, chairing our program committee. And I also want to thank Lucia Gutierrez, who you heard in the beginning. She's our executive director. She's done an outstanding job for us at AAHHE, and I want to thank her. So again, on behalf of the board, muchísimas gracias. Have a safe Friday and have a blessed weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.